Hello, ladies and gentlemen. It's your favorite paranormal investigator, Tim Sudano. Happy to be here with you on this December 26th. Yesterday, first off, happy holidays. Yesterday, we had a fantastically uncommon conference. Christmas Day, and the start of Hanukkah, Sunday. That's rare. It doesn't happen. And today, we have Twas. So, happy holidays for all of you who celebrate. For me to you, and of course, I hope the rest of your year is joyous and fun. And I probably won't get a chance to say this to you, so Happy New Year as well. Let's talk about one of the icons of this holiday season. Decidedly Christian or Catholic, but has its roots. Well, that's where its roots kind of start. And I'm talking, of course, about this fella here. This is Saint Nicholas. Now, Saint Nicholas was born in 270. He was born in 270. 270. That's the year 270. And he passed in 343, and he was canonized rather rapidly. He was born in the city of Tara in Anatolia. This is the Anatolia province of Turkey. And this is during the Roman occupation. And he's also known, interestingly, as Nicholas the Wonder Worker. I had no idea that was the case. But Saint Nick he's the patron saint of a myriad of things, including sailors, merchants, archers, repentant thieves, children, that makes sense, brewers, pawnbrokers, toy makers, makes sense. Unmarried people, which will make sense in a second. And students in various cities. His reputation evolved into what we now call to the guy we call Santa Claus. And he looks a little something like that. So that's the Santa we know today. However, that's more the fable of what Saint Nick inspired. There's not that much known about his early life. We knew he came from very wealthy Christian parents, which is probably where he got the money for the following. He is said to have rescued three girls from being forced into prostitution by dropping a small sack of gold coins through the window of their house each night. And this allowed their father to pay a dowry for each of them so they could get married. That's pretty nice. And it was certainly kind of establishes that legendary thing we'll come to know as being of the giving spirit, especially during this time of year. He was further known to simply calm a storm. I don't know if he waved his hand or anything, but it was said he calmed a storm at sea. And he chopped down a tree that was possessed by a demon, and he saved three soldiers from full execution. He made a pilgrimage early on, and when he returned after time, he was Bishop Myra. He, during the persecution of Diocletian, which was the last, that was the last persecution that Rome ever executed or performed the Christians or the Catholics. It was Constantine's power that pretty much put an end to all of that, and was released. And there's unfounded reports that he was at the Council of Nicaea. However, that is not documented. It's just mentioned. It's just mentioned passing. This is kind of like hearsay thing. But there's even a thing that he was so offended by one person that he slapped him. He was known as the heretic Arius, excuse me. But again, that really falls into the category of fact, St. Nicholas. Interesting story about names. His remains were built into the church, Nicholas Church, or canonized in this point, 200 years after his death. And let me pause right there because that's an interesting thing. You have 200 years there between 325 and 525 this church was built. But and canonization takes, and it has taken up to sometimes 1,500 years to really go through. So he was canonized, I believe rather quickly. And he must have had. It doesn't list the miracles that were supposed by him after his death, as a spirit of God. But he was canonized, and the church. The church was built in Myra. Bishop was the bishop. And so it was in 1087. Greek Christian inhabitants were subjugated by the newly arrived Turks. Mispronouncing that, I'm sure. S-E-S-J-I. Seljuk. S-E-L-J-U-K. My mistake pronouncing that. Turks. And this is shortly before the East-West Schism in Turkey. And it was a group of merchants who sailed in and out of that area from Italy. Secretly remains away from his old church, St. Nicholas, to Italy. And specifically Bari, the town of Bari, A-R-I. And they removed the major heads and the legs and stuff like that. They left the bones alone. So they got most of them. Took him to Bari, and he was entombed in a sarcophagus there, and then now they're enshrined there, and his remains. The rest of them recovered after a couple of years by Venetian soldiers got all together again, and he enshrined at San Nicola. Basilica di San Nicola, that's it. And I don't know a lot of historians about this. Some. Chiefly what remained was this legend that he had developed. Was he freely gave his own money. Even though he took poverty, he still had money from his family, and he saved those three girls. He bought the bail for the soldiers. He threw money at the problem. It worked, and he asked for nothing back. He never got money back. He didn't know what he was doing back. He was doing something hard. And I think that's beautiful. That's beautiful in its own right. He went by a few different Nicholas of Myra, and that's Lycia, not Lycia. There was a kind of a biography written 200 years after his death. And it mentions Nick visiting. Sorry, I'm incorrect about that. There are multiple St. Nicholases. Someone else visiting that. Visiting St. Nicholas's tomb. So ignore that entry there. But Nick himself was. I call him Nick because I know him more like that. Like that. Rather. And sorry, that's a little presumptuous of me. But he gave of his not only his own free will, his wealth. I mean, I think that's pretty. So we have this. Here's a rendering of him as a bishop, and he's lauded today as the man essentially gave us everything we have in the modern context of what is the Christmas season. Just on Kwanzaa too. But the notion is during this time give to our fellow who are perhaps less fortunate than we are, who are certainly. How should I put this? Let's just stick with that. So let's fortunate. We'll just say but what a remarkable legacy. That was almost 2,000 years ago when he started doing this, almost. And it started today. And we created a legend around him, which is this guy. This is the guy we know. As Santa Claus. But in reality, this was a real person who inspired such charity in others. That even today we call him his real name sometimes. We might be referring to this guy, but we are nonetheless referring to in reality this guy. Saint Nick himself. Saint Nick was by and far one of the first influencers, really. If you think about it, if he were alive today, I bet he would be just resoundingly, lauded with all kinds of kudos, stuff like that. I'm sure he would have a stunningly simplistic philosophy that would enamor him people from all whether they were Catholic or not. And he'd probably have 15 million followers online. He would probably have a talk show, a YouTube channel, some sort of podcast that would let him continue to pontificate on the spirit of not only God, but the spirit of giving. It's interesting that throughout centuries following Saint Nicholas, excuse me. There have been times where I just recently saw a movie about this, where mankind has lost its way in a sense, and it shows us. I'm talking maybe a century or two back, especially. It's specifically referring to Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol. And apparently there was real sentiment. Excuse me. About how Scrooge felt. That Dickens ran in circles, and he was a celebrated author. And he had a he had a slump. These two books prior to Christmas Carol that didn't do that well. So he was nonetheless in search to find a new book to write. They showed his process as actually seeing his characters come to life in this den on the street even. But the characters were cobbled together from real people in life. And it was astounding the reaction it had because it was a rushed book. The idea just hit him basically, and he kind of figured out the story in 6 weeks. I'm an author myself. I had books. It took me longer than 6 weeks to write 300 pages. So kudos to the guy who wrote the Christmas Carol. I just blanked on his name all of a sudden. But the story itself, never seen or read or watched any of the plays, the movies, the books. You can't watch a book. Read a book. It's an uplifting tale. And the critics were typically very sour than most authors put out. It's a triumph, but can say enough good things about it. That it actually inspired people to embrace that Christmas spirit in the era. The Victorian era, where most of the rich did things like Scrooge. It's the reason to pick my pocket at the 25th of December is Scrooge. So famously known for saying, as a paraphrase, but he had the author had reached that piece of people's soul that re-inspired people to give again and to enjoy Christmas and take in that spirit. In a time where Christmas was almost about to fail commercially. Now let's touch on the commercialization for it. Yes, especially today. It's super commercial. Put up the Santa, plastic reindeer, the lights on the house, and we probably spend more on this holiday than we do all year. The birthdays that we celebrate with our family and friends the whole year. And is it a trap? That's a tough question, isn't it? It could be taken that way. It could be said that yes, it's a super commercial time. The lights by the Christmas tree, waste all these resources just to make you at home feel good. Let's take another look at that perspective. One could argue that you get into these phases of celebration during this time of year. Excuse me. Because there are expectations. Again, this goes toward commercialism. You need to have the pretty tree. We need to have the lights up. You need to have the decorations all over the house. Why? Because, and this is the most common response when I poll my friends on this, because we want our kids to have a better Christmas than we did. Wow. We want our kids to have a better Christmas than we did. And I can relate to that notion. I don't have children myself, but I can certainly relate. And it was when I heard that it took me down a different path. And that path was, do you give to any charitable functions or organization, any charitable organizations at all, or do you give the homeless guy by the door, give him that extra buck, he really can't afford it. Or do you have that one, for lack of a better term, charity you give a little to during this time of year? And the answer was mostly yes. Some people have withdrawn from corporate charities only because there's been a lot in the news lately that most of the funds go towards the charity itself for operational costs, and they seem to be rather exorbitant. Like the percentage of what actually goes out to help people is woefully low. I'll say that. And that's something to look up for yourself. But I would suggest that going back to our original topic, that Mr. Saint Nicholas here of Bari, of Myra, still resonates, even if it is a little corporate. You still have that feeling, that sensation, that mentality to dig into your heart and give what you can. No one's asking you to go bankrupt in giving. Absolutely not. So. And there's also the thing that we have Christmas parties. We're doing a Christmas party a couple weeks back, and I didn't bring anything. I didn't know we were supposed to be completely honest. I thought Christmas. No, that's not true. I brought a tin of cookies. I forgot about that. But tin of cookies, $5. I mean, it's not much, but everyone enjoyed it. Everyone enjoyed those cookies, and we were all happy. We were just a bunch of friends. I mean, I only had one or two family members there that came with me, and we all had a great time. Everybody there had a great time. There was pictures and celebration. There were drinking. There were stories. Moderate sloppy drunk or anything. But let's enjoy. And I felt for the first time in a very long time, I might add, the Christmas spirit. Because this one person opened up their home. Family, I should say. This one family opened up their home to a bunch of their friends who may or may not have had a larger celebration in their family circle to go to. And she does this twice a year. This is a nice party. It was catered and everything. And there were so many people on her list. She has to hold two separate parties, and she does it. This is the hostess, the wife of this family, and wonderful person. They're all wonderful people in that family. Very giving, very supportive, and happy to help where they can, you know. And this helped a lot of people. One of the people that came with me, a good friend of mine, it was his birthday on that day. And no one was going to give him a celebration. So I had an opportunity to invite someone. I brought my buddy. We celebrated his birthday in a more traditional Christmas setting, but nonetheless, we sang to him, and it was great. It was great. We had a good time. So I say Saint Nick has done his job above and beyond, and I consider it something of a miracle that notion, especially at this time of year where everything's so rushed and stressed, and maybe we do think a little bit too much about the cost of something versus the need of something or some things. And you want to do your best to give during this time of year. That's fantastic. That's wonderful. And I'm not here sitting on a high horse telling you how to behave during this holiday, not by any stretch of the imagination, but for cultures all over the world to take this time of year as something sacred, whether they're Catholic, Christian, or not, they give. They hold back. They give, and they hold back their lesser intentions, I guess you could say. And then they look across the way at perhaps a perceived enemy. This happened in World War I, I think, called the Christmas Day Miracle. The Germans and the Americans were at war in the trenches in World War I. And these it was also called the Christmas Day Truce, I should say. And some of these fellas, they were fighting in the trenches in 1914. They called an unofficial truce. Now, apparently, this happened across Europe during the fighting. Suddenly, all the guns went silent on Christmas Day. And these fellas, some German, some Alliance, got together. It wasn't called the Alliance then, I don't think. But they celebrated the fact that they were alive, the fact that they didn't have to kill each other, at least for a day. It was nothing short of an actual miracle. And so that's why it's called the Christmas Day Miracle, or the Christmas Day Truce, as it's officially known. Believe it or not, there's actually an official thing about it. But it kind of goes to that notion that something is inherent in us during that time of the year. And I want you to look at the conditions these guys are in, by the way. I mean, they're in the trenches. This is wintertime. Look how they're dressed. They are bundled up. It is snowy and icy, and look at the ground there. They even have a little baby Christmas tree. How about that? And they're singing. There's one where they're singing songs. In fact, I think that's happening in the background there. But it really goes to show that St. Nicholas, close to 2,000 years ago, 1,700 years ago, maybe a little more now, created this ideal, this sensation, this not sensation either, this I guess he showed us a way to acknowledge our true hearts. That's how I think what it really shows. He showed the human race in the 4th century, when everything was horrible and brutal. He grew up in the Roman occupation of that whole era. area rather, where Turkey is now, and Greece. That was all under Roman rule. And the Romans were pretty harsh. But he found a way to make things right. And he did it anonymously. That's the wonderful thing about it. I'm sorry. He did it both anonymously and unanonymously. He helped those 3 girls out secretly, but he publicly helped those 3 sailors. And he helped so many other people realize their full potential. To realize what's in here, the truth of the human heart. So that's St. Nicholas. And then we go on to this is St. Nick. Then we go on to this guy. Now, it takes a few centuries for this to kind of creep in. The idea that Nicholas here, Santa, is the same person, or at least the embodiment of St. Nicholas's spirit. And it starts with a Norse tradition, actually, completely in the opposite vein. And what I'm talking about is this guy. Norse tradition has this fella running around about the same time, acting as you might expect a culture that derived from the Vikings to think. I mean, the mentality makes sense. It's like, do good this year or else this guy will come and get you. And what he did was, this is Krampus. This was the traditional Christmas season, mind you, character. Now, in this rendition and in many other renditions, he looks like a satyr, which I find very fascinating. And if I may sidestep for just a moment, that kind of lends to my paranormal M theory, which mostly in the ancient world shows a lot of correlations between various cultures that didn't even talk to each other having the same type of creature show up across the world. So, were we really seeing these things? Were our ancestors really seeing these things? Quite possibly. I mean, I don't know if they're seeing goat people running around, but they certainly saw something, and that interpretation of the satyr, for whatever reason, stuck. Now, Krampus's thing was, and I laugh because it's really negative and horrible, but Krampus's thing was basically, you'll notice that little kid there in his backpack, or his barrel back, I don't know, whatever that thing is he has on his back, we'll call it a backpack for now, is in very deep trouble. And I'll tell you why in a second. Please note the two little, oh, there's my door. 2 little boys with their hands up. No, they're not waving Krampus down. I wouldn't wave this guy down, would you? No, they're running, eek, scared from this guy. And one little kid fell. And you'll notice they're all boys, which is really fascinating in and of itself. But apparently young ladies didn't act out back in the day. But the story is that Krampus would, if you were a bad child, and this is basically the equivalent of don't go in the woods or the monster will eat you. that type of thing. Well, this is don't be bad, or this guy will show up, and you see that chunk of sticks he has in his hands? It's a bunch of switches. He will beat you mercilessly until you are crying and bleeding in the buttocks area for being naughty. So be good, or this guy will show up. And if you're extra super naughty and you don't pay attention to your parents and your elders and you misbehave, see that kid in his backpack? That kid's going to be his lunch. Yep, that's the tradition. Krampus, if you were super naughty, you might we're past hitting you with switches now. You're food. You are food, and you might even be taken to hell afterward. Or you would be taken to hell and then eaten. It got dark so quick with Krampus, but I guess it kept kids in line. Over the next 200 or 300 years, or 400 or 500 even, after St. Nicholas passes, we get, of course, Santa Claus, and that worms its way into Norse legend as well. Everyone knows about Santa. In the Norse tradition, he's called Santa Claus, or Santa Claus. Yeah, very good. Sorry, I'm not making fun of you. I'm trying to pronounce it correctly. But the Santa Claus here and Krampus eventually team up. And on December 5th in in Norse tradition, both of these guys show up and they compare their naughty and nice lists. How about that? They cross-check each other. And then Krampus goes beating the snot out of people with switches who are bad, and Santa rides along on a horse, doling out gifts and toys for the kids who have been nice. Now, one of the interesting dichotomies here is we leave behind the more overt take on helping more or less adult people, or young adults anyway, and we go to kids. Well, that kind of makes sense if you think about it from anthropological, we'll stick with that one, perspective. Because or even a psychological perspective, because as a kid, you're going to be influenced more, and that'll affect how you grow up and act and behave and, interact with your fellow people as an adult. So scare them young or treat them nice young, or reward them, I guess is the word, young, as to produce a better adult. Sorry, the whole notion makes me cringe and laugh at the exact same time. So let's get back to our buddy. Buddy, I'm questioning Buddy. Let's get back to the guy they call Krampus. Briefly, let's dive a little deeper into the M theory idea real quick. My paranormal M theory has that there was someone or something somehow, and this might blend into ancient astronaut theory some, these stories or these creatures were somehow traversing the world, or like the various species of horse and the various species of cow, they were just there, whether there was actually a goat person, because we've never found a skeleton, at least to my knowledge, of this creature or of any of the ancient creatures. And there would be some evidence somewhere, hard evidence, and that would, from a scientific perspective, that would be bones, We've never found these creatures' bones. We can assemble a brontosaurus, in a year because we have their bones. We know roughly what they look like. Pardon my yawn. But there was, there's no, evidence as far as the, sort of skeletons and what was left behind of these goat creatures. This kind of holds true for a lot of the monsters out there in folklore. We don't have the skeleton of a layak, for example, which is this horrible creature, and I don't have the picture of it. But it's this horrible creature. I want my face up there. Sorry, guys. This disgusting, not disgusting, but nonetheless horrible creature who kind of during the day, if you will, looks like a beautiful young woman. However, at night, her head separates from her body and it goes flying around as a super long. Oh, and most of her organs are attached. So, it all goes flying around with her. I'm not sure if it's an ethereal form of flight or if she sprouts little wings from her head or whatever. But she has a super long tongue, and the disgusting idea, my personal estimation, is that she feeds upon late-term fetuses. Man, that's messed up. From an anthropological perspective, it could be that this creature was more or less invented or imagined to explain miscarriages or to explain, well, miscarriages, actually, that's the only one that comes to mind. But you could add birth defects and other fun stuff. But she was supposedly the one who ate the fetus whole. Anyway, so was there then a reason to have a satyr there? And let's look at the root of the word satyr: Satan, a devil, typically modeled after a satyr. I mean, we didn't call it that way back when. But as humans, our ancestors didn't really have a name for the devil per se. There was Hades, but he didn't have horns and goat feet. No, that was Pan who had that. That was a satyr. Satyr. So how did the satyr tradition from, at least as far as the Western mythology goes, from Greece, ancient Greece, end up in the Northlands, looking pretty much like that? Trade stories were traded. Vikings and the Norse and everyone in between were pretty avid sailors, and they went everywhere, including England, including North America, where I'm from. There's an established village that was discovered and up in Nova Scotia. Oh, I could be wrong about that. Sorry, Canada. I may have that wrong, but or very much near there. I think it's near there. And they discovered it and they refurbished it, and they didn't have to do too much, from what I understand. So the Vikings maybe had this idea that they had Krampus in their head and they knew about it, but they didn't have an image of what he looked like per se. And perhaps they borrowed, hey, this guy matches the description we were given in our stories of this creature, Krampus. So they borrowed it. And that's entirely possible. But that doesn't necessarily speak to how they... Well, it kind of does. It kind of answers it, but that's pure speculation. Pardon me. If only I had a time machine, I guess is... that's what I'd use it for, anthropological fact-finding and archaeological fact-finding. It's like, oh yeah, okay, this is what happened. This is why Troy took in the horse. This is why... I mean, man. Anyway. Pardon me. So anyway, our hooved friend over here is basically all the Norse have, and we're chiefly, even with Santa Claus himself, we're chiefly reliant upon the Norse mythology kind of informing what are a lot of our modern holiday traditions surrounding Santa Claus and Krampus are. So, and you know, from the Tannenbaum or go to the tree, which is, you know, basically the Christmas tree, to you know, our favorite bearded friend. We're basically borrowing from Norse mythology and integrated Christian mythology in order to get where we are with, you know, where we are today. One thing we didn't really, or haven't really taken into account, is the fact that while Krampus is an interesting take, and we should take a look at Krampus's true origins. In fact, let's do that real quick. Let's take a look where Krampus, the idea of this creature, even came from. Basically, the figure of Krampus has its roots in, as we've mentioned before, the pre-Christian Alpine tradition. Kind of and you know, again, we discussed a bunch of this already, that he's the antithesis, the flip side of Saint Nick. It did all happen during the the whole winter solstice, Christmas time thing anyway. But some of the Norse legends have it that Krampus is the son of Hel, I beg your pardon, Hel, the Norse goddess of the underworld. And we've actually seen depictions of this in more recent movies. They called, in the films, they called her Hela, but Norse mythology calls her Hel. And linking him as some sort of the son of Hel. Oh my goodness, excuse me. With and still, but that's about as far as my research really took me. Having this creature is, yes, Norse mythology, but why would this creature come out at Christmas time, or winter solstice time? The idea, it kind of comes down to, again, that tradition of be good or this guy will come and get you. So it's just the inverse of be good and you'll get rewarded. If you're not good, this guy will come and whoop you or eat you. So I guess it's just a take on the general punishment reward system that we humans have used on our children ad infinitum. But it's, beg your pardon. So sorry to keep yawning in the interview. But what we're faced with is we have two entities that come out the same time of year. Both, at least in Norse tradition, have been interwoven with each other. And what we have is a unique combination. We have both sides of the coin now. Now this has been going on for like at least, I guess, traditionally speaking, about 1,000 or so years, maybe 1,500 years, where this has been held true. And we get into a bizarre dichotomy where, and this is more of a modern iteration, I might add, that Santa or Santa Claus and Krampus are brothers. According to my research, according to most sources, this is not the case. Santa was merely integrated into the Krampus mythos to, again, provide that reward punishment, two sides of the same coin dichotomy for young people to aspire to be good, whether it came naturally to them or not. And that's chiefly where we get that notion. And it's really a modern notion. It really wasn't, prior to film and television being around more readily across the globe, that wasn't even thought of. They weren't brothers. Not really. Not ever prior to, I'd say, the 20th century. But as a storyteller, I can understand where you would need an antithesis. And in Krampus, that is the perfect antithesis. And having the true good versus evil thing, that dichotomy, again, we are given and we give our children chiefly the opportunity to make choices and reap rewards and consequences because of those choices. And it happens over a year. Now, if you, for instance, push dad off a roof as you're helping him remend the roof, and he falls and he breaks his leg, that's pretty bad of you. Whether, hopefully it was accidental, but, maybe you might be forgiven for that. But if you're being malicious about it, okay, let's change that from pushing dad off the roof to pushing your little brother off the roof. Bet you can fly. Pah! Okay, that's mean. You're going to get visited by Krampus for that one. You're getting whooped. And at least. So we have that type of thing happening. But are they brothers? According to every source I came across, no, they are not brothers. But I find it interesting that certain traditions, more, should I say, Western traditions hold, and I mean deeply Western. Like if you head further west, you're going to like England and Ireland and Scotland and heck, even France and some of those other countries in that area. I guess traditionally the more Engle and Latin based countries are going to steer away from Krampus completely because they're a little more puritanical. And again, we're talking a few centuries back. And to embrace any knowledge or acknowledgement of a creature that is chiefly demonic and included in the tradition might be, in their eyes, inviting such a creature into, or such a, and everything that comes with it, into their homes every year. So they made an interesting alteration to that, which is, if you're bad, you don't get presents, and you don't get whipped by a 7-8 foot satyr. No, you get a lump of coal in your stocking. And even that, at the time, and we're talking again a couple hundred years ago, at least with a lump of coal, you could keep yourself warm. Excuse me, during the winter. But that's all you got. You got a means to survive. We weren't going to, as parents, kill you off. Sorry, you don't get nothing. You've been bad. Go over there and die in the corner of the cold. No, of course not. Good, evil. If we're going to set up those extreme poles by which we measure our children and their psychology, and who they are as beings, as a parent, you're probably going to say, yeah, here's a little something. It's like, but chiefly that lump of coal was the worst thing you got. You can't play with the lump of coal, especially if it's on fire, keeping you warm. So there you go. Now, a truly inventive individual, if you want to play nerd advocate, if you prefer, if you'll allow, could crush that piece of coal into a diamond, but I digress. I mean, over the year, we only just recently came up with the technology to do that in your own backyard. But still, I mean, that's still a pretty heavy duty thing. So, as the Christmas tradition matures, I guess we'll say, and it's really the Norse mythology that pick up the ball. And that's the Netherlands in general, and even Germany to a degree, really kind of give us the roots to our current tradition when it comes to Santa Claus. So Santa Claus comes along as this happy, joyous human. Happy, joyous human, and he has a sack full of goodies on his back, full of toys for all the boys and girls, good boys and girls, I should say, across the world. Now, this idea has been modified to include every single toy and game and gizmo and gadget we know today. I mean, Santa rolled with the times and upgraded everything, but still done through a more magical lens in today's tradition. But again, we go back to the Norse tradition. It matures over time. It gets a little more friendly, even kid friendly, because we took out the devil goat guy and turned that punishment from getting beat from sticks to a lump of coal at the worst And it's basically a behavior modification mechanism that we employ upon our young children. And hopefully, we don't have a child that goes socially askew and is a good individual and all the rest of it. But let's talk about Santa's less. Well, you know what? I'm going to play you a video that I made. And we're going to pick up from there. Enjoy. St. Nicholas. 'Twas the night before Christmas, and all through the house not a creature was stirring, not even a mouse. The stockings were hung by the chimney with care, in hopes that St. Nicholas soon would be there. The children were nestled all snug in their beds, while visions of sugar plums danced in their heads. Mamma in her kerchief and I in my cap had just settled our brains for a long winter's nap. When out on the lawn there arose such a clatter, I sprang from my bed to see what was the matter. Away to the window I flew like a flash, tore open the shutters, and threw up the sash. The moon on the breast of the new-fallen snow had given the luster of midday to objects below, when what to my wandering eye should appear but a miniature sleigh and 8 tiny reindeer. With a little old driver so lively and quick, I knew in a moment this must be St. Nick. More rapid than eagles and coursers they came, and he whistled and shouted and called them by name. Now Dasher, now Dancer, now Prancer and Vixen, on Comet, on Cupid, on Donner and Blitzen. To the top of the porch, to the top of the wall, now dash away, dash away, dash away all. As dried leaves that before the wild hurricane fly, when they meet with an obstacle, mount to the sky. So up to the housetop the coursers they flew, with a sleigh full of toys, and St. Nicholas too. And then in a twinkling I heard on the roof the prancing and pawing of each little hoof. As I drew in my head and was turning around, down the chimney St. Nicholas came with a bound. He was dressed all in fur from his head to his foot, and his clothes were all tarnished with ashes and soot. A bundle of toys he had flung on his back, and he looked like a peddler just opening his pack. His eyes how they twinkled, his dimples how merry, his cheeks were like roses, his nose like a cherry. His droll little mouth was drawn up in a bow, and the beard of his chin was white as snow. The stump of a pipe he held tight in his teeth, and the smoke had encircled his head like a wreath. He had a broad face and a little round belly that shook when he laughed like a bowl full of jelly. He was a chubby and plump and right jolly old elf, and I laughed when I saw him in spite of myself. A wink of his eye and a twist of his head soon gave me to know that I had nothing to dread. He spoke not a word, but went straight to his work, and filled all the stockings, then turned with a jerk, and laying his finger on the side of his nose, and giving a nod up the chimney he rose. He sprang to his sleigh, to his team he gave a whistle, and away they flew like the down of a thistle. But I heard him explain ere he drove out of sight, Happy Christmas to all, and to all a good night. Hope you enjoyed that. So this is kind of where the paranormal side of Santa Claus really comes into play. Yeah, in the beginning, he was hanging out with a demon guy, at least in Norse mythology, or a half goat or a satyr or whatever you want to call Krampus. And they compare their naughty nice lists and go from there. Now, in this poem, which was written by Mr. Clement Moore, initially anonymously. That was written in 1823, and it was written for his kids, basically. But my question when it comes to this poem is stuff we all know nowadays. It's kind of commonplace as far as traditional knowledge goes, or knowledge about this tradition, that Santa Claus rides in a sleigh pulled by a bunch of reindeer. But what Mr. Moore puts before us in this description is that they're not reindeer, they're tiny reindeer. And the sleigh isn't a sleigh, a big old sleigh. It's a tiny sleigh as well. And Santa Claus isn't human, at least by my interpretation, but an elf himself. Perhaps a king elf, perhaps the elf that drew either the long straw or the short straw, depending on how you look at it. Seems pretty happy doing his job, but he's an elf nonetheless. No, he's not described with pointy ears or anything like that. But he has some staggeringly magical abilities that just were that. It's Christmas magic, or it's Santa magic, or it's some sort of, there you go. I made it happen by the virtue of my will kind of magic. First, this little guy shows up after making something of a clamor outside. He shows up on the front lawn initially. With a quote, little old driver, so lively and quick, I knew in the moment it must be Saint Nick. Now he calls him Saint Nick, Saint Nicholas. Now the nickname of Santa Claus, or Sinterklaas, if we want to go back to Norse tradition. So was this the common perception that Santa wasn't human? Did it evolve to that point? Was Saint Nick an elf the whole time? And I don't know. It's just an interesting shift, because we don't have this guy. No. Well, yeah, we have an elf. Calls him a jolly old elf in the poem. Now, I'm making a lot of this and taking a few liberties with the interpretation, but I want you to hear me out on this, because it's kind of interesting. He talks about how the coursers, or the reindeer, the ones pulling the sleigh, calls them out by name, and they take off. Now, yeah, they flew with a sleigh full of toys. And apparently it was super quick. He's almost describing a UFO. Almost. I'm not saying that's what it is at all, but it sounds like there's this teleportation kind of effect. There's this whipping of wind, and it sounded like dry leaves that before the wild hurricane fly is the line. So whoosh, suddenly he hears them on the roof. They're like teleported up there. They don't take off and land on the roof. They just teleport there. Okay. Not bad, Mr. Moore. You've encapsulated teleportation. And he hears the same little creatures, each tiny little hoof on the roof now. And they're prancing and pawing of each little hoof is the line. And so the guy is looking out his window, and he draws his head in. I drew in my head and was turning around. So here's the window. He's looking out. Oh my gosh, they're gone. And suddenly I hear him on the roof, and I pull my head in, and I turn around, and down the chimney comes, again, he calls him St. Nicholas with a bound. So, I'm here. And dressed in, he says dressed in furs, from his head to his foot, and tarnished with ashes and soot. I'm paraphrasing the lines, but so if he's tarnished in soot, and the teleportation only works for the sleigh and the reindeer, apparently, he had to. I'm trying to find something of comparison here. We'll use my headphones as a rough diameter. So imagine something about this round. That's your chimney back then. Kind of is today in most cases too. Maybe wide at the bottom where the fire goes, but the chimney narrows. It's about the size of about 1.5 coffee cans, big coffee cans, going straight up. And if he's covered in ashes and soot, he had to be small enough to fit down there. I'm telling you, Santa was an elf in this depiction. And a tiny elf at that, not the kind of elf from Mordor or from whatever Tolkien came up with, but a little elf. Actually, I take that back. Elves. I was about to say elves from Norse tradition, but no. This is a little guy. And I might add, I think he's an elf this whole time. Anyway, and an older elf, like an elder elf, if you prefer. So he comes down in a bounce and a bound, and he's got all kinds of energy, and he has a little tum-tum. Yeah, I use the word tum-tum, but he's so happy about what he's doing. Infected with the Christmas spirit, if you will. Not unlike what St. Nicholas did for all of us over the centuries ago, all those centuries ago, rather. He he has a bundle of toys over his back, the sack of toys we all know, and he slings it on the floor and he starts picking through it, and he's so happy about it. His eyes, how they twinkled, his dimples, how merry. And I think he may have been a little drunk too, although if he's riding around in a sleigh out in the weather, my cheeks would be rosy, my nose like a cherry, as would be that too, because wind whipping and all that fun stuff. Teleportation or not, apparently it's a limited effect. Anyway, he's also a smoker. He has a pipe in his mouth. Now, we've seen depictions of Santa with a pipe in his mouth. As a human, not as an elf. Beg pardon. But, I don't know, Grandpa's a smoker. It just intrigued me for some reason. And he must be puffing pretty hard on, because there's a wreath of smoke around his head. And he has a broad face, like an elf, and a little round belly that shook when he laughed, like a bowl full of jelly. So, to make your stomach move like a bowl full of jelly, you have to be in a lot of movement. There has to be a lot of kinetic movement there. Now, again, I know I'm drawing bizarre parallels here, but I'm trying to understand Moore's perception of Santa Claus, because it is not the human Santa. It is not this guy at all. That is not who he's describing. Not in the least. And he's super happy, like abnormally, like supernaturally happy. This mouth drawn up like a bow indicates he's smiling. Now he has the white whiskers. The beard of his chin was white as snow. Okay. We've seen depictions of elves with beards before, not unusual. And so he was chubby and plump, like a right jolly old elf. Well, he names it. He names it there, that's the line from the poem. He names it. I'm telling you, there was a time when Santa was an elf. He wasn't a human. Anyway, and the guy is this creature, this person, this entity, whatever it is you want to call it, is so different, yet so amusing, that the encounter, the what do they call it, experiencer of this person from Moore's perspective. I laughed when I saw him in spite of myself, like I should have been scared, but I wasn't. And then the elf entity, Santa person, with a wink of an eye and a twist of his head, soon gave me to know I had nothing to dread. This is the line. So he throws a little, hey, I'm here to help, buddy. We're going to give your kids the best Christmas present ever, and you'll get a little something too. And he didn't say anything. This is all pure into action, speaking as words, not louder than words, but as words. He spoke not a word, but went straight to his work and filled all the stockings, then turned with a jerk. I guess they only did stockings back then. There's no mention of a tree or Tannenbaum or anything like that. And mind you, he didn't say the elf Santa creature came down on a rope. He just landed. He just came down the pipe of the chimney, coffee can big, covered in soot, and landed with a bound. Ha ha! Like it was nothing. I'm telling you, they thought Santa was an elf back then. Because then this happens. He laid the finger alongside his nose and giving a nod, up the chimney he rose. So he used a little bit of Santa magic there and ends up back on the roof. And I don't know how he saw what happened on the roof. Maybe he parked. I don't know because it never says went back to the window to watch him. Suddenly we have another camera, another perspective at least, on the roof. Because he says he sprang to his sleigh, to his team he gave a whistle, and they all flew off like the down of a thistle. So yeah, that's why your cheeks are red and your nose is like a cherry, because you're flying around in weather. Cold weather at that. It might be a clear night, but still could be very frosty and cold. So, kudos on capturing that. But whose perspective was that saw him spring into a sleigh? If he goes up the chimney, he's got some momentum, and he just angles into the sleigh. Brilliant. 10 from all the judges on that one. But we're still left with the fact that even as he exclaims as he drove into the night, "Happy Christmas to all, good night," we're still left with the fact that this guy is describing an elf. And I keep hitting the table, and I'm probably making a lot of mic noise. My apologies. But human Santa is not who they're talking about. I'm convinced of this. And I know it's probably less than entertaining to watch me lose my mind over a poem written in written in 1823. But at the same time, what was the perception of Santa? And I could not find an answer. No depictions, nothing really showed him as an elf. They always showed him as a human. And that's where I think we take an interesting, because a kid's going to ask this question. If my 52-year-old butt is going to ask that question, a kid is definitely going to ask, "We mean Santa's an elf?" Well, I don't think so. The parents are going to say with confusion, maybe there's letters written. Maybe it's like, is Santa an elf? What's going on? I don't know the answer myself. I always pictured him as a person like this guy. But that's not what's described. So again, I need a time machine just so I can go back and ask these people what they were thinking, or what their experience was, or what they were themselves perceiving as far as, everything. regarding their interpretation of this person, this Santa Claus entity, the Saint Nick, because it's called A Visit from Saint Nick, or Saint Nicholas, excuse me. That's the name, that's the title of the poem. And how is Saint Nicholas the human, or at least the entity inspired by the actual historical figure, suddenly not human? He's suddenly an elf. And then they say, oh no, it's Santa magic later on. Oh no, it's it's the spirit and magic of Christmas that motivates him and helps him with all of his stuff. And you've seen Tim Allen when he plays Santa do the nose thing, and a few others have done it as well. But still, I had that question in the back of my head that needs an answer. And maybe you guys out there can help me out if you're willing to waste a few hours on the internet to figure out, was Santa believed to be an elf himself? Because he's a miniature dude. He is a miniature sleigh, miniature reindeer. He's a miniature dude himself. And he moves like an ethereal and or magical creature of legend. And I know I'm making a huge deal over absolutely nothing, but during this time of year, things like this occupy my brain, I guess. So I leave it to you, ladies and gentlemen. Is Santa Claus an elf? Or was he at least perceived as an elf? Inquiring minds want to know. It's quite a bit after the top of the hour, so let's stop for a station identification. This is the United Public Radio Network, 107.7 FM in New Orleans and 105.3 in the Gulf Coast. UPRN talkradio.com. Esoteric programming at its finest. So we've talked about St. Nicholas himself. We've talked about Santa. We've talked about Krampus, how they overlap and how they are not brothers. And we also broke down Mr. Moore's poem, famous poem, I might add, regarding Santa, a fictitious experience he had with Santa, but he made Santa sound like an elf. Well, okay, so we have that question hanging over us. Was Santa perceived as an elf originally? My answer is yes. That's my personal belief, though. And we made him human again, so he's more relatable. Because most modern interpretations have him surrounded by either dwarves or little people, children, or children who, and these, or at least they look like children, and they're really elves, but they're 800, 900 years old or something like that and still work for him. And he has a myriad amount of creatures, like in one of the latest endeavors in telling Santa's story, where he has anthropomorphized penguins and polar bears and all manners of elf creatures and dwarves and trolls. And basically you take a would-be enemy / monster / whatever from more traditional Norse mythology, and that's a broad category, because that the North, if you say Netherlands and the Norse, you're covering a huge swath of the northern part of Europe, and making them all work at Santa's North Pole workshop, which in more modern interpretations has it being a city. Makes sense, I suppose. As usually under some sort of cloaking technology or magic. And so on and so forth. But I digress. Santa is a human. Works. We can relate to another human. This human lives in a magical world. And he also is possessive of magic himself. Possessive of? Yeah, okay. He's in possession of magic himself is what I tried to say. And so, what's the big takeaway here? What is the big takeaway here? And we have about 30 minutes left before I really have to sign off. So this might be a long dive into what we have. We have a historical person, the actual Saint Nicholas himself, who performed, reportedly, some pretty miraculous things and did some pretty charitable things as well, giving away his own money without a need for or request of repayment to put people on better paths. Saint Nick was certainly the epitome of gratitude, graciousness, and giving, ultimately. And he came up in really hard times. He didn't have to do that. He did not have to do any of that. He could have easily done even half those things and probably still would have been considered a saint. But Saint Nicholas, seemed to be the type of person who just couldn't let things lie. He couldn't abide a true status quo that wasn't, in fact, status quo. So people with power, as they do often today, push their weight around, threw their money around. Well, he had money too, so he threw it back in their faces and foiled a few plans, saved those 3 sisters, saved those sailors from death. Yeah. And to set a precedent so strong that he is immortalized with a fictitious version of himself is nothing short of miraculous in its own right. To have a story and a background and actions that touch us to such a degree that virtually virtually now, but the entire planet, or certainly cultures across the entire planet, celebrate that notion every single year for the last, 1,700, almost 2,000 years? Remarkable. Absolutely remarkable and astounding. Has it become more commercial? Absolutely. Is there a one-upsmanship in play? There might be. There might well be. But at the same time, when you have your family over, and it's interesting, what you're really looking for, at least what I really look forward to, is watching naive young faces light up. It's Santa Claus. I see him. There's a blow up doll of Frosty, of a snowman, of anything really. I've seen blow up Hanukkah candles, the big ones on display on the front lawn. I've seen manger scenes plastered across the front of a garage. Not kidding, just a few blocks from me. Most houses have lights that celebrate the season. Most houses have decorations on the outside. Most houses have Christmas trees, or if you prefer, Tannenbaum, in the front window, so everyone can see that you celebrate. And it's an image, isn't it? It's really projecting out to the world that you are at least of the Christmas spirit. No, I wouldn't go on the door and say, "Hey, can I have a few bucks? Is you feeling so generous?" I mean, there are limits to people's generosities, but if you have your friends and family over, yeah, you have them over, and it's a beautiful thing to share that, to share your home and share what you have and give. To give. And I think that's the takeaway, by and large, despite my misgivings about Mr. Moore's poem, despite the decidedly odd inclusion of Santa Claus into the Krampus Nacht. That's the holiday, by the way, tradition. Honestly, it's about two things really. For the kids, it's a life lesson on what being charitable and good and helpful can ultimately give you. Now, children aren't quite as emotionally developed as we adults. In some cases they are, in some cases they aren't. They operate on a reward system and have for, since the beginning, I think. You do this right, you get to play with the toy an extra 5 minutes. You get 10 minutes of extra screen time. I'm just fishing for examples here, but we have created a culture around, I should say this, we have included this tradition in its broader aspect into our various cultures. There is something very universal about this time of year. And I think we should all take that to heart and really kind of think about it, because we're at war with ourselves more often than not, at least in one part of the world or another. Freedoms are challenged, lives are taken or severely altered. But this time of year, things lighten up a little bit. We give ourselves a break. Let's call it that. Us humans give ourselves a break, I think, for the most part, to experience that piece of ourselves that is good, ultimately good. And that's saying something. We all take a breather to be our truer selves, to give, to help. I think that's absolutely beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. And that's the takeaway, I think. We have a little bit of time left, so let's talk about what's happening in 2025. As far as this show is concerned, we're going more. I think there will be more live shows starting in 2025. My next guest is going to be my boss. I guess you could say, at the UPRN. That'll be Michelle DeRoche, I believe is her name. I don't even know her last name. What a horrible employee I am. And we're going to talk a little bit on the 2nd after the new year, which is going to be fantastic. I'll have some returning guests from season 2, and I'll have some fun new guests as well. I'm still putting all that together, but I think we'll have a lot of fun. I think we will. And we should also maybe not be as cynical as me when it comes to the or single-minded or hyper-focused on silly things. So I'm going to, well, I'll hold off on that for a second. But the Christmas / holiday season, I think, should be maybe universally, maybe globally, the time where we sit down and shut up for a second and listen to ourselves. Because I think if we do that, we're going to find most times we're pretty good people. We want to help. And we should take that to heart. Definitely. So, a little over 20 minutes to kill. As the clock reads, let's talk about one final thing regarding the holiday season and going back to what is truly one of the most miraculous things in the world. We're going to go back here. 1914. World War I. That is just, for me, that is absolutely phenomenal. People on opposite sides shooting guns at one another, lobbing grenades and mortars and whatever else they had at their disposal, take it upon themselves, without orders from above, to cease fire. To cease fire and share what they have with one another. Both sides were starving on the front lines. They didn't have much. But one side had more water, one side had more bread, and so on and so forth, and rations, and so the story goes that they sent a signal out because they were out of something. So I don't know if it was ammunition or not. Let me see. Okay. In looking this up, I found the following. The truce began as Christmas approached, with many soldiers feeling the weight. I'm reading here. Many soldiers feeling the weight of the war and longing for a moment of peace. On December 7th, 1914, Pope Benedict the 15th made a public appeal for a truce, urging the fighting should pause, at least for Christmas. This call for peace resonated with many, since setting the stage for what would unfold. As Christmas Eve arrived, German soldiers initiated the truce. They did so by lighting lanterns and singing Christmas carols. The British troops, hearing them, joined in the singing. And the atmosphere of goodwill led to heads poking up and little waves happening, and come on over. And sure enough, they all met in the middle in what in war terms is called no man's land, because you go out there, you're not a man anymore, you're fodder, especially if the fighting's going on. Well, They met in the middle. You saw the pictures. They huddled. They sang songs. They exchanged gifts in the trenches. These are two armies in the same trench, singing carols, exchanging gifts, and having an overall more of a good time than they expected to. Let me say that, because these poor guys were deep in snow and all that fun stuff. So during this respite from the fighting, they met with one another. They shook hands. They continued to sing carols. They lit little lanterns, and they even made each other gifts. There's one example, and I wish I had a picture of it, where from a shell, a big mortar shell that was discarded in firing, one guy fashioned a toy train from it. And it was pretty cool. I'm not gonna lie. Toy train engine, and it wasn't bad looking for what it was. And yeah, they exchanged gift. They played soccer, and they had a relatively good Christmas experience together. And it's just one of the most heartwarming things I think I've ever heard of, especially in a time of war, especially on the battlefield. You don't hear about this happening hardly ever. In fact, I think this is the first time I've ever heard of anything like this happening in the history of warfare. It is estimated that 100,000 soldiers participated in these types of celebrations. So it wasn't just one foxhole against another, trench against another. This happened across Europe, apparently, or at least in the places where there was the heaviest fighting. And yeah, it was that moment I spoke of earlier. I'm going to get choked up here. Mankind, we humans took a break from all of our crap, especially in the heat of war, to look here. And I think that's the most beautiful thing in the world. 100,000 soldiers participated in these celebrations, highlighting the shared humanity that transcended the conflict. Man, that is going to make me cry. I mean, at the pause. Yeah, I did a little research in that break, which was a second for you. And I was wrong. The peace did not start up right away. In 1914, my history is a little fuzzy. I thought it was pretty much on the heels of that event. But following the Christmas truce, or the miracle of Christmas Day, the fighting resumed almost immediately. And mostly because the high command on both sides weren't pleased that their men were getting along with the perceived enemy. I think too many times we have officers and those in command who have very little understanding of what battlefield conditions look and feel like. I mean, some have come up through the ranks, some have led from the front, and they do know, but mostly that's not the case. And I think that was the issue here. The Christmas truce was not repeated the following year. In fact, the fighting continued to 1918. There were small little echoes of this Christmas truce, but it wasn't as widespread as on the day in 1914. The immense loss in life and suffering are well documented, unfortunately. And yet, perhaps fortunately, we need to learn our lesson somehow. And sometimes that's tough, ugly photography and interviews and evidence of what it means to go to war. The Christmas truce remains a poignant reminder of the humanity that can exist on even the darkest of times. This is a paraphrase. This is from the article I read. But unfortunately, it did not lead to a change in the course of the war, nor to the broader peace it should have. And I think that's the problem of the leadership, honestly. Perhaps it should be a requirement that our leadership do lead from the front, do experience what the grunt experiences. The soldier that says yes, sir, all the time, or yes, ma'am. Wouldn't that be fascinating to see? Wouldn't it have been, and I think perhaps it may have even led to such a peace early on if orders from the higher ups were ignored that day. War is not the answer. Not to everything. But then I'm not a soldier. I was briefly an airman, and I was a cadet at that. And I understand and experience some things for myself in training. But I was never on the front lines. Had I stuck with it, I likely would be retiring right about now. And I wouldn't have this fun podcast to talk to you fun people all about. So, not to leave everything on a downer, but and I digress from my mild malaise and lament there, but it's worth considering. We are in some need of such a miracle again to reverse the hearts and minds of those that maybe don't have our best interests at heart. And I don't mean America, and I don't mean North America. I mean the world, the larger citizenship. Not citizenship, excuse me. I misspoke. The larger populace is the word I meant to say. In many cases, we have a handful of people leading millions, supposedly leading. And I think we need to really maybe take a very, very hard look at, or at least inspire them. Inspire our leaders. Why not? That'd be great. Inspire our leaders to take a hard look at the bigger picture of humanity. We only have this one life, unless you're into reincarnation, and then we have it to do over and over again until we get it right. Until we can be that generous individual like St. Nicholas in life. To give everything away, take nothing back. And to do so freely with our hearts open. We could use more Christmas miracles, Christmas Day miracles in our life today. We really could. Who knows? Maybe I'll inspire someone who happens to cross this podcast and has hung in there for all my ramblings, through all my ramblings, and take some of what I say to heart. We humans could be so much more. And we have this wonderful season, a season of giving and reflection and humanity, both at its worst and its finest, as we at a point where we try to make it the finest it can be. I don't know. I kind of lost my train of thought on that, but the bottom line is we need to do better. As a culture, as a species, we need to do better. And I think it starts with doing better in how we treat each other. Truly. Yeah. I'm going to take one last look at our friend here. This is St. Nicholas. Well, this is an AI rep of St. Nicholas, but you get the idea. Here's the original. And to think a man, and I've said this a couple hundred times in this podcast already, but I think it's more poignant at this moment than any other. This man started one of the greatest underground movements that ever happened. And at one point, at a moment of absolute strife in 1914, his generosity, his example, I should say, paved the way for a pope to make a plea on a radio broadcast. And by some miraculous event, stop the fighting for a day or two. And it should have stopped there. But it didn't. But we're not lost. We still have this guy representing the former, the real one. And there's nothing wrong with a fictitious character. Nothing wrong with a fictitious character that reminds us of the wonderful things we can do if we put our minds to helping one another, to giving what we can to those we love, and giving what we can to those we don't even know, to absolute strangers who might be and usually are in need of help, especially during this time of the year. So, on this strange December 26th, which started out quite happy for me, and leaves me a little more melancholy, but at the same time hopeful. I do have hope that the human race will wake up and start treating one another with some common courtesy. I don't need you to respect the other person necessarily, but the common courtesy of knowing that they have the same types of emotions you do, the same types of needs and hopes and wants that you do. That person in the car next to you, that person in the other in front of you or behind you in the grocery aisle, on the street. That's really what we have to focus on, I think. So let's make this something of a New Year's resolution then. We will be changed, not unlike Scrooge was in A Christmas Carol, where he said, and I believe the line goes, I will carry the spirit of Christmas all year long. I think that's a great start. 2025 is the year that at least and I hope you'll join me in carrying the Christmas spirit, well, the spirit of this season, if you're not Christian, all year long into 2025, into 2026, and you'll have Christmas to remind you how it goes. So, well, I guess that's it for now. No, it isn't. I have 5 more minutes. But I want everyone out there listening to this to really take into account what they have, what they don't have, and what others might have and not have as well. And it just, there was a great tradition not even 50, 60 years ago, maybe a little more now, where people would say hello to one another. Good morning, good evening. Hope you're doing good today. Now we avoid each other. All you got to do is say good evening, or good morning, good afternoon. You don't have to engage people in massive conversations. Hey, how's it going? That's it. That's really, really, really it. So let's all take that and move on from this decidedly introspective episode of Paranormal Insight. And I apologize if I brought the room down, but you guys have a wonderful rest of the year. Certainly happy holidays from me to you and from all of us here at UPRN. And we will see you in the new year. Next show is going to be a live one with Michelle Desrochers. I hope I said her name right, on January the 2nd. Okay. Thank you very much and have a great rest of the week. At gmail.com. That's paranormal. If you have a paranormal experience that you would like to discuss on the show, please email us at paranormal.insight.podcast@gmail.com. That's paranormal.insight.podcast@gmail.com.